Leo Sayer has an amazing new album coming up, Northern Songs, and I say amazing because it's been a work in progress that I've known about for a number of years. I think, sitting in my lounge room floor and you playing me songs years ago from this, Leo, but we can track this right back to albums, from the 1970s, all this in World War Two, and like you've not been unknown to be doing Beatles songs in the past. What I loved about this album was that you have Leo-fied the Beatles. You haven't come out and done just stock standard covers verbatim as how they were on Beatle records. You've taken your interpretation and put them onto Northern songs.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that I did when I thought of the idea, I mean, I was trying out my studio in Glebe in Sydney, the time when I was living in Sydney. And I just reconfigured the whole studio and I found a really good way of working on my own so that I could basically play everything, sing by myself and record at the same time. Lots of different, easy methods of making a record. And I was playing around with ideas and I was hearing in my head the Beatles, but I was hearing them as somebody else might interpret them. So the idea was, what if Michael Jackson used kind of the Billie Jean format, and then I listened to Billie Jean, and I started singing Eleanor Rigby, and suddenly fit band, dan, 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 do 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 do. The whole thing sort of fitted, and I went, hang on, why not do it like that? So I threw myself into the experiment, and kind of did this with every tune. I started to listen to the song in my head rather than go and cross-refer the record, and so how would you hear the Beatles and how would you reimagine those songs? So to go out and have a walk in the park and you'd start singing Norwegian Wood, and then you'd kind of somehow mix it up with a Bill Evans kind of jazz setup, so I don't know, all of these things came in like really happy, fun marriages. The idea of making the record was to put the beat in the Beatles and get some fun out of it.
Well, it's interesting you say that the Billie Jean vibe, because look, on my notes as going along and listening, I've said
Yeah, exactly.
Billie Jean vibe in there.
Yeah,
So that is deliberate. That's I'm
I was
glad.
hoping
I'm
somebody
glad
would
I
spot it.
wasn't going mad
No,
just
no,
listening to it, thinking,
no,
"Whoa, bit of a Michael
no.
Jackson feel in there." And considering that Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney had a crossover as well, so
Yeah,
that's quite
absolutely.
a fitting song to put over a Paul McCartney song anyway.
Dead right, dead right. Well, I mean, that's what I'd hoped people would spot. That, and a lot of the times, I was saying to you that one of the first persons to listen to this was our great musicologist Glenn A. Baker, and the first thing that he said to me, he said, "Okay," he said, "don't say a word, don't give me a sheet, let me guess the song." And he couldn't most of the time until the first vocal came in. When I played it to him, he couldn't tell which one it was. So anyway.
Well, Strawberry Fields again is like that. You go into, I guess, what we have in our head as the Beatles' Strawberry Fields, which is a very definitive version, and to do something different with that again is quite an adventure. And I would imagine must have been sort of a strange decision for you as to where you were going to go with some of these songs in
Well,
thinking of how to reinvent them.
yeah, well, look at Strawberry Fields, and I think what we all remember, and at the time, Strawberry Fields were very much around that Sergeant Pepper's period of time, and Penny Lane, of course, around that time as well. They all came from the very much the psychedelic era, and everybody was looking at Strawberry Fields Forever, and of course, the original film that it shows, which they made of that, is all very kind of mystified and very sort of like LSD, the whole thing. And I thought, well, no, for me, it's a song about John Lennon telling everybody about the place where he used to go and play as a kid, which is actually a real park in a little gardens, a small park in Liverpool called Strawberry Fields. And it's a bit like Van Morrison going back to Cypress Avenue, and brings you his past in a song. So I thought that this was more a reflective song about looking at the past. So I thought it deserved a different treatment. So I kind of went, Ry Cooder slide guitar, as it were, and a sort of like more of a kind of swampy kind of feel, and that sort of, yeah, very much a storytelling kind of approach rather than just a hippy drippy let's get some kind of hippie sounds together and make it all feel like it's a love fest. The song is more than that, I think.
The track Revolution, which is probably one of the first acid rock songs, definitely pre-metal metal from 1967 for the Beatles.
Absolutely.
And you've given it a soul flavour here, and there's quite a soul link that goes right through your Northern Songs album.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a soul singer, and from the years of listening to everyone from Otis Redding to Al Green, and James Brown, that's always been an element that's I use to kind of interpret music. It's my roots in a way, and I find if I can ever lean that influence into a song, I'll do it. The idea behind Revolution, the musical template, if you like, that I was being cheekily bringing into it was the knack. Do you remember my Sharona? Dun, 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 and so it's got a little bit of that, So I got away from the swing beat that is say you want a revolution into say you want a revolution, dun, 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 got into those straight fours, and it was very interesting. Hard to fit the words in. And if you go thinking I've been a chairman now, you've suddenly got to change all of that around. So I had to take a few liberties with the lyrics and swallow a few little bits or rephrase them. But I think it fits. And the other fun I had in that one was playing a lot of harmonica in it. So it was a track I could really, put a real hard harmonica, bluesy kind of Chicago-like riff into it. So that was fun, and programming that one up and playing it, because I played everything kind of myself on this, was so much fun, because adding the horns and getting it to kind of just have that real sort of Memphis type of vibe was really good, and I think it comes off.
When we watch the recent Peter Jackson Get Back, one of the focal points of that is the creation of the song Get Back. And like Absolutely. Paul McCartney's like 6 drops of Essence of Terror, 5 drops of Sinister Source, and bang, Get Back has been created. It seemed to happen so quickly. How much effort did you go into...
You see in the movie, you see the song grow from absolutely, let's try this, and then Mal, the roadie, comes over and writes down some lyrics that Paul's thinking of, and the song, then he plays it to John, and John goes, what about? And you see the whole song develop, which is fascinating. And it is such a great song. I mean, in Let It Be, the movie, let's remember in those sessions, this was the moment when George Harrison, who'd earlier opted to leave the Beatles, comes back into the room with Ray Charles's keyboard player, Billy Preston. And brings Billy in, and suddenly when Billy starts to play piano in it, all these fabulous little riffs, bluesy, suddenly the song comes together. And I think arguably that's a moment when the Beatles went really soul. They shifted, a big shift for them, I think, from that straight English rock, into something really American and groovy and black, dare I say. So when I did Get Back, I thought, I've just got to go for it, hellfully. I've got to sing it like a soul singer. I've got to sing it like Paul Rodgers, if you like, with Free. I've just got to go, and make it a performance. So it starts off with a 1, 2, 3, Bruce Springsteen kind of thing. It's kind of trying to give you a feel that it's all live. In fact, it was all one take anyway, the vocal, and to just give it a vibe, a real vibe, rock it up,
Across the Universe was one of those songs that the Beatles, I guess, started in the White Album sessions, but evolved into spill over into the Get Back sessions before it appeared on the Let It Be album. That's probably the one song on your album where you've stayed pretty close to the original arrangement.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, I always thought, I was thinking about Oasis when I did that, and I keep thinking of this big guitar riff, dun, 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 big arpeggio riff, and I was thinking, it's funny. I mean, the Oasis always are, as we know, are very, very good and very well done, but an echo of the Beatles, because they are really a band that is using the Beatles template to kind of remake their own music, especially on that first album, And basically, if you take the Beatles and then go from Oasis, you'll get much more angular approach to the song, rather less of the flowing acoustics, but a real arpeggiated heavy guitar. And I sort of went for that treatment, and I thought this is maybe the way that Oasis would do it. But first off, it was really rough and really rock, but I kind of smoothed it out a little bit as it went on. But it's such a beautiful song, and probably Lennon's greatest lyrics. It's just an amazingly beautiful song. What it expresses, in understanding how small we are in this fantastically huge universe. That's what it's about. And I think it's about, it's a song that I wanted the lyric to come first. And so I tried to pare it down for that, make it really clear.
There was a point in the late 70s, you were having some massive hits around the world. The Americans were basically getting influenced by the Bee Gees sound. That developed into sort of the disco movement, but there was a lot of soul happening in that latter part of the 70s when You Make Me Feel Like Dancing was around. And I listened to Girl, your version of Girl, on this record. And I would imagine that had you been covering this song at that time, it would have been pretty similar to what you've generated now.
Yeah, I've been a bit cheeky there because I've taken some of the chord progressions in the chorus and straightened them out a little bit, which a friend of mine did point out. You mean that's not quite right. But I was trying to sort of get a kind of, if you like, a Prince or Al Green approach to it. And it's all about the loop. You've got this, you've got this nice little drum loop going, and I kind of wrote it to that. I found a drum. I'm like a magpie. I collect lots of little, because I work on my own. I collect lots of samples, bits of previously recorded guitars, maybe from sessions that I've had, little bits, and I store them up and I put little notes on them, and they're all sitting there in libraries of discs. Drives, and they're kind of, and they're guitars, maybe these ones in G, you could use those. So I'm always pulling bits out, and I found this little riff, this little groove, this little drum beat, and the loop, and it was just perfect. And I started singing over it, and it didn't really need too much, and it was great. It gives me a chance as well, this song, to exercise the falsetto again, which of course I'm known for You Make Me Feel Like Dancing and all those Easy to Love and all those older songs. So it was nice to do that. If you can find the right key for that, the falsetto still works, even at 74 or 73.
Let's talk about the song A Day in the Life, because that's probably George Martin's masterpiece just as much as it is the Beatles, with that those
Absolutely.
developing sounds that are in there.
Yeah.
You've started, you haven't gone from the piano beginning, you've stripped it back to the guitar beginning, which is a very different takeoff point for that song.
Yeah, I've got a guitar riff, that's the acoustic guitar riff that kind of like links that in. So it's kind of putting it again, a different beat into it, making it much more kind of insistent, if you like. Da 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 da. I read the news today. Oh, so taking away a little bit of the ballad approach and kind of making it something that's more pushing, something that's more insistent. So it's kind of it's almost waking up and annoying you. It's that kind of riff. And I think that gives it some movement. Hopefully, of course, when it comes to the great big operatic crescendo that the Beatles have, da da, the rising notes at the end, which end up, with the live orchestra, and that incredible note which nobody's ever worked out what exact key it is that finishes it. I kind of just bastardized that a little bit and pulled a riff out of that. So it's kind of a little bit different. But what a beautiful song, and what a lovely impression that whole song. It's like a picture of the 60s, that song, of a particular time, 67, 68. I read the news about Ormsby Gore, the guy who had an LSD trip in the car and crashed his car. And basically it is a snapshot of that time. It's a little bit like watching those programs on Lord Lucan or Christine Keeler, and you suddenly, you're right there. It's almost like a little mini documentary of that time. So it's a fantastic song to explore. I hope I did it justice.
A Hard Day's Night's an interesting one because, think 1964, Abbey Road Studios in London, the Beatles in the studio with George Martin, and right at that very same moment in Detroit, the Supremes in the studio with Berry Gordy.
Yeah.
You've got like two pieces of music history happening at exactly the same time on opposite sides of the pond there. If you took what you've done with this Beatles song and transported it at that time to 1964 and gave it to Berry Gordy to produce, is your version of A Hard Day's Night something that Berry Gordy and Motown may have come out as with for the Beatles?
It's got that classic Motown beat, that puff 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 puff, like a Happening and all those great songs that Diana Ross and the Supremes did. But it's also got I've Been Working, the Van Morrison, come Bobby Blue Bland before that. There's a little bit of that, sort of I've been working so hard, so I mixed that into it a little bit as well. And you hear the harmonica coming in at the end. And basically, it's got a kind of like a Motown type of soul, chant kind of going through it. And I always saw that the potential in that song. I think I might have actually arranged doing it with the band many years ago. I had this version to do like that of it. It was just a reading of the song, and so it was something that I tried before and I thought would work. It's been a hard day's night. And it's interesting.
Yeah, Magical Mystery Tour is another interesting one in that the Beatles never performed it live. McCartney has, now. But, back in the day of the Beatles, Magical Mystery Tour was after they'd stopped recording, or not recording, touring. So it never evolved as a live song, but has now. With the sort of the live versions of, McCartney and the versions that have been done of that, how has that influenced you going into the studio to, do a take of a song that the Beatles themselves never ever performed live?
Yeah, well, that again evolved from a riff and a loop and a drum loop, and I think I'd prepared it for another song. I was working with a girl and a singer, and she had a song, and I constructed a backing track, but she didn't really like it, so I kept it for myself. And then I found out when I was thinking of Magical Mystery Tour, boy, it fitted. Roll up for the mystery tour. Like a little taking that bit as a riff. And originally that was going to be the opening track for the album, and I was just going to throw it away like that. And you can hear it goes into like a live concert in the middle of it. It's like there's lots of different tastes in it, and it is like I think the Beatles wrote it as an introduction to their project. It's a kind of throwaway thing in a way, isn't it?
I thought covering Julia was particularly an interesting choice for you because it's such a personal song for John Lennon, being about his mother. An acoustic ballad in the original Beatles form, but with rhythm added in the Leo Sayer version.
I was kind of imagining a sort of semi-punk band covering this. Half of what I got. It's like. You could really go for it, and it's got a lovely rhythm to it. The lyric, the way the words are, the phrasing has got a lovely. So it lent itself to that treatment. So I was imagining a kind of I don't know, a sort of like Foo Fighters or type of band, attacking it in a live room, and that was the kind of thought behind it. And it is a beautiful song. And I think if you add rhythm to it, it brings out some other things in it, some other kind of essences of it, because it's a song written about beautiful landscape of memories, of thoughts, the ocean in there and everything, all of those kind of lovely kind of visual elements. So if you expand it and kind of bring some more music into it, I think it kind of opens up those things. So I've been it's been interesting that that's one of the favorite songs on the album that people have fed back to me. It's one of the successes, I think.
Interesting with "Can't Buy Me Love." So what you've done with Julia is you've taken it in one direction. With "Can't Buy Me Love," you've taken it the complete opposite direction and stripped it right back to basics.
Yeah, I think my imagination was a poor South African guy singing this. I really kind of, I was originally, I was thinking, I mean, they have this, when you go to South Africa, they used to have this, in the time of apartheid, they used to have this dreadful expression. They'd call black people pedestrians. And that's really cruel because they'd never be able to afford a car. So I was imagining this poor black pedestrian guy looking at the value of money, diamond rings, and all of those things that are in the song, Can you imagine it? I mean, I buy you a diamond ring, my friend, if it makes you feel all right. And I was coming from that perspective. I didn't exactly, and when I sang it originally, I had that voice. So I was imagining a poor person singing that, and what relevance would it be to them, a diamond ring and all these beautiful things. But I don't care too much for money. You see, poverty, people don't care too much. So extend that line, keep it. I don't care too much for money. No, I don't care too much for money. Keep that, because money is irrelevant. I don't have it. Think of poor refugees, or, people kind of coming from a very, a nothing background into the material world that we're all in. So it's that song for me is a collision of worlds, and a bit cheekily, I suppose, because I mean the Beatles were writing a kind of like a real love song in there, but I thought no, it could be also a social song, a song of social conscience, and then I get really cheeky at the end and I say, yeah, money, who needs it, kind of. But to me, it's my favorite track on the album. It's the one that I really enjoyed making the most, and turning it into this lovely kind of walking, musical thing was really fun to do. And I probably spent more time on this track than many of the others.
Norwegian Wood must be an interesting song to do because, again, a deeply personal John Lennon song. It was a confession.
Yeah,
You're singing somebody else's confession when you sing this
yeah. I
song.
mean,
So what goes through your head?
well, I mean, the first question you ask is, yeah, did he set light to the house, or the flat, because that's what it's about. He sees all this, the smell of Norwegian wood burning. Yes, and immediately you're into this tiny little adventure. He meets this girl. He sleeps in the bath because she doesn't want to know, or something like that. Or she's got to work in the morning. This kind of meeting, and he's kind of almost a kind of abusive or insulting to the gift that she's given him, of this stay at my place overnight, and share my time. And so I kind of thought the song's a bit cold. So I sampled lots of feedback. I have a harmonica microphone, and when I hold it against my body at certain places with an amp nearby, it feeds back. So those are all feedback notes. They're just, and I sampled them all, I recorded them all, and then rearranged them to make the music of the song. So it's kind of an interesting wave of kind of different sounds there. It's like a soundscape. And I deliberately went very jazz with it, like a kind of Bill Evans a drum track to a Bill Evans piano song, and I felt that it deserved this kind of stillness, maybe of the wood, maybe of the forest. You can imagine walking through a Norwegian forest, and it's a very cold place, white and black trees, and no warmth or welcome in there. And yet the contrast to the fire, which I think is kind of very interesting,
We're getting very close to where the album title came from with Only a Northern Song.
Yeah.
But before we get to that one, let's talk about Here Comes the Sun, which, in explanation as to what Northern Songs is, it was Lennon McCartney's Northern Songs they're publishing. George Harrison, Here Comes the Sun, is not a Northern song. It's the only not Northern song on this record. You've included, a George Harrison song in, what is basically an album of Lennon and McCartney.
And Northern Songs as well is his only a Northern song as well. Yeah, no, no, I thought, well, for me, there's always been incredible. I mean, I think the cruelest part in the movie, in the movie of Let It Be, is the way that George walks in and plays the guys all these incredible songs. Isn't it a pity? You know, oh God, I can't remember all the. Yeah, they're just incredible songs, and they're all finished and they're ready to go, and the rest of the guys go, "Yeah, great, George. Yeah, yeah, superb," and they kind of carry on with what they're doing. They ignored him, and of course that hurt him, and he walked out of the session. You see what happened. You know, he walked out and said, "Right, okay, I'm over this." He didn't want to know. Of course, it's not their last album, Let It Be. The last album where Here Comes the Sun is from is Abbey Road. And by that time, they've all come together. And now in Abbey Road, I feel that the influence of Harrison and all of the elements that he brought in, like Eric Clapton, suddenly those influences and some of the engineers that were working with them at that time, George has a real place. He's equal to Paul and John on the Abbey Road album, really the total equal. He has found his place, but he has to go through the pain of Let It Be and the rejection of those songs, which end up on All Things Must Pass, you know, his first solo album. And he has to go through this kind of rejection thing. So I thought it was very important to represent George here, because for me, George is equal to the other guys. You know, we always talk about Lennon McCartney. That's the essence of the song. It's a bit like when you go to the band and you think of Robbie Robertson. Okay, Robbie Robertson is down as writing all the songs, yeah? But Robbie Robertson wouldn't have been able to get the results of the band's performances from the night they drove Old Dixie down to The Shape I'm Into without the rest of the guys, without Levon and without Rick and without Richard Manuel and Garth Hudson. Those guys put as much into that band as he did. So here's George in this position. I feel that with this album, he's got to be very highly represented. And Here Comes the Sun. I mean, I took a very kind of, I'd imagined a Mississippi swamp, and all the, you know, the start of it is like as you'd go out on the water, and it's boop, the sound of the frog, the sound of all. It's a very. I tried to get a really organic approach to it, you know, and sort of get it like it was a real sort of earthy song, because it's about the earth. And George was very much a nature person, you know. He was a nature boy. It was very much about the earth. So I tried to bring that influence into it.
Only a Northern Song, along with It's All Too Much, All Together Now, and Hey Bulldog, 4 songs that were basically thrown away, weren't there? There's not a lot of Beatle people talk about the 4 songs that made up those extra tracks on the Yellow Submarine, but you know, they were quite classic songs, as Only a Northern Song is, as you've pointed out.
Yeah, Only a Northern Song. I mean, what George was writing about, he was actually pissed off with Dick James and Northern Songs, the publishing, because basically they would kind of like develop all these songs, give them to Dick, and then Dick would take his cut, and you know, and they were in a crisis point at that time. You know, John had met Alan Klein, of course. Paul was talking to Linda Eastman's dad, you know, lawyer, a New York lawyer. So they were talking about splitting up the Beatles. They were talking about what they're worth. They were trying to find out what they were worth and where they were going to go. And they were in conflict because everybody had a different idea of where to go. You know, from George with his Hare Krishna kind of mentality, and the boys, yeah, with their different representatives. So you're looking at a band in conflict around about this time. They're all disagreeing with each other, and they all want to go off and do their own thing. But they're staying together out of loyalty to each other. You know, this is what you see in the movie Let It Be. There's this wonderful loyalty of 4 friends who want to try and work it out. You know, the song We Can Work It Out. Hey, perfect, isn't it? That was about them. They wrote that about them. So Northern Songs, George wrote about, it's only a Northern song. You know, you might want my hair, you might think my hair's blue or brown, you know, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's only a bloody song. Let's say it's only a fucking song, you know, so it's not more important than that. And that's what he was trying to impart in this song. I know the story about it because I actually talked to George about it, because it always fascinated me, this song. I thought it was a little gem personally, but it was kind of like a little throwaway thing. And he said, no, he said, I love that. He said, and I really wanted to get over the fact that we are being owned by other people. We are not ourselves. So there's a real message in there. I thought it was a really important song to do. And then that brought the title, Northern Songs, which is what they are. They're songs from the north. We're down here in the south. I particularly have moved to Australia. I've emigrated from the Northern Hemisphere to come and live down here. Love it. But at the same time, it's always in my head that I'm a North person. I'm, girl from the North Country, Bob Dylan. You think of all those kind of things. Yeah, I'm a North Country person in my mentality and the way that I write songs, the way that I do things. So I felt it was very important to do this song because it says a lot about me as well, as well as what the Beatles were saying.
The track Yesterday was probably the very first Beatles solo song, wasn't it? Because there's no John, there's no George, there's no Ringo on that song. Paul went into the studio, recorded it on a day that no one else was around, but such a great song.
George Martin told me that he deliberately gave everybody the slip. He basically said, they all said, well, let's not do anything. Let's take a day off. Because I think Ringo had to do something with Maureen and he couldn't be available. There was a family or some legal thing he had to do. John wanted to go and buy a new car. And apparently there was this day and Paul called him overnight, really late at night, said, come on, I've got an idea for a song, but I don't want to tell the other guys yet because I don't have much courage in it. I'm not sure it's any good. So he brought it in and and he'd got it from a dream. So basically he dreamed the song and he didn't really know whether it was good or not. It was so close. It came automatically, So he went in and George and I think it was Jeff Emerick in the studio, probably Richard Lush as well. They were just in the room with him and he started playing it out. And then George came to the piano and started working out a few chords and it just went from there. Then the next day they told the guys, we're not working tomorrow. And they had an extra day. They put the strings on. They literally did it in 2 or 3 days. And they wrapped it up before the guys even knew about it. Then I think Paul played it to John and John said, oh, that's got to go on. That's good. And Paul said, yeah, but you haven't done anything. He said, yeah, but just give me the writing share and I'll be fine. and that's basically, how they did it. They never ever thought of working. It hadn't the concept of them separately writing, even though you can clearly hear which songs are John's and which songs are Paul's. Like Strawberry Fields is definitely Lennon's, and Revolution is definitely Lennon's, and Girl and Eleanor Rigby and Get Back, of course, are Paul's. So they never ever thought of splitting it up in that way. I don't think. Yesterday, I tried to imagine myself in Cuba, so it's definitely got a kind of Havana kind of thing, and I thought, don't sing it high. I thought, sing it low. Yesterday, and sing it more like a melancholic kind of song. You've lost everything, and really, let's swim in that kind of feeling of loss, rather than kind of. It's a distant, I'm over it now. No, I'm not over it. In the song, I'm trying to sing as if I'm still in there, still in that moment of loss. All my troubles seem so far away. Now I believe in yesterday so much because yesterday is still prevalent.
I'll just reverse some orders here and talk about I Feel Fine.
Sure, yeah.
Let's go to Nowhere Man first, because you just mentioned Cuba. This has got a bit of a Bahamas, a bit of a reggae feel to it. So, keeping in the same part of the world.
Yeah, I was thinking UB40 and all those kind of classic quasi reggae bands. The sort of the ones, all the guys that kind of like aren't really in Jamaica, but they're making reggae records. There was a fashion, wasn't there, in the 80s and 90s, bands like UB40 taking things and reggaeifying them, and I thought it was fun to do. And I've always heard he's a real nowhere man sitting in his nowhere land. I could imagine, sort of a Marley-ish kind of or voice kind of doing that, or Jimmy Cliff, and I was thinking, how would Desmond Dekker or Jimmy Cliff do this song? And that's it. And it's kind of makes it fun. because basically the song is an insult to a guy who's an absolutely useless, you know. So the song is a very barbed song, you know. He's absolutely, you know, it's basically saying the guy's a wanker in the song. So basically, let's turn it into fun, you know, sort of like make a jokey rhythm to go with it, you know.
Well, I guess, you know, when we're talking about that, you know, you go into I Feel Fine, and that's got a bit of a big band feel to it. That you've, you know, the original I Feel Fine was probably the first song. I think it might be even noted as the first song to have feedback on it with that guitar at the beginning.
Yeah. And it was fun taking songs like going back to Can't Buy Me Love and Hard Day's Night, songs that were very, very kind of unproduced, as it were. You know, there were songs that were just, it's an acoustic guitar, bang away, put a bass line on it, and you sing the song. And it's a group of voices. It's very simple. So it's a band, they're band songs. And it's funny to kind of, if you can take those songs and then sort of turn them into production. Oh, how would I treat this? You know, so you take the basic template of the song and you kind of say, right, now let's conceptualize it. Let's go further. And I felt that I Feel Fine could kind of lend itself to a sort of South American, Brazilian kind of treatment. So I brought a lot of those kind of instruments and samples of those instruments into it, you know, and there's a Turkish oud in there as well. You know, there's a lot of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern sounds in there. There's lots of different mixes. And engineer John Hudson did a great job with the BVs on that as well, because I only had like a couple of BVs and we found a synthetic way to add more to them. So we made these little lines answering and everything. And it's a good groove.
It's interesting you're talking about the backing vocals there. So, Hey Jude, your version of that has this really interesting soul backing singer towards the end there. And I was, you know, the minute I saw Hey Jude there and saw the length of it, so you're keeping it to roughly the right length of song, I was thinking, well, it's going to be interesting to see how he ends this off.
Well, it's got a trick to it, Hey Jude, because the original is Hey Jude, don't let me down. Well, I'm doing Hey Jude, dun, 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 don't let me down. Dun, dun, dun. So I've lengthened it and I've extended it. It starts off as the song was going to be. I was singing it almost as Bob Dylan. So the harmonica at the start, you know, it's classic old Dylan, times were changing harmonica kind of line at the front of it. Is supposed to kind of set it up to make you think that it's going to be an acoustic song, you know. And of course, there are a lot of acoustics. There was sampled acoustics going all the way through it. And I thought the idea was that it would build up. You know, the drums would come in on the second verse, as it were. And it slowly all adds. And I was imagining, I think what I had, because I've always got a picture in my head of some visual kind of, you know, being an ex-graphic designer and photographer and an artist, I always tend to think in visuals. I mean, like the album Selfie, I could tell you the painting that inspires every single one of those songs. So there's always a visual cortex, you know, which is behind these things. And I remember seeing a video of Tom Waits in the Neighborhood. Do you remember that video? And he's walking down the street and there's a tuba player in the neighborhood, you know, and they're all joining in. Oh, the drugs, eggs chase the bacon round the frying pan, you know, and there's this thing, they're all walking down the street and more people are added as it comes in. So the end of it, I imagined walking down the street and people coming out of houses in a sort of New Orleans funeral procession kind of vibe. They all join, like that guy The Weeknd made a recent video, and they all come out and they join you, and there's this procession going down the street. The singers add, the horns add, all the musicians add, the thing gets bigger and bigger. The vocal goes more into a live setting, which is another thing cleverly that John Hudson always does. He took my voice, and at the end of it, you can hear this kind of almost hollow echo kind of coming into the voice. So suddenly the voice is, whoa, it's up there in the sky. It's no longer right in front of you on the microphone. So we expanded it and we made this. I mean, John did a huge production on this in mixing it for me. I would describe to him how I wanted it to be. I was imagine it coming out of the studio, out of the house, out of the doors, down the street, you know, almost to a massive airport runway, and there's this huge crowd of people following you down out into the future, you know, and that's the way they were in the album. And he said, yeah, I can do that. So I'm giving him visual ideas all the time, you know, describing things as visuals, and John was interpreting them in sound, in a sound canvas. And I think that that's what we've done. You know, I mean, John is a big part of this album, really is. He's a very important part. The way we both think about sound and what can be done. I mean, remember that John did those classic Bryan Adams songs, you know, like the theme from Robin Hood, you know, that huge, great big song Tina Turner did, We Don't Need Another Hero, which is massive templates. You know, these are songs that sound like mini movies in themselves, you know. So John's got those skills of being able to mix, being able to kind of treat sounds, being able to create space, create relationships between instruments, drums and vocals and everything, and bring them into the huge, great big live arena. And I used all of that. I leaned on him to do all of that for me, you know. And so he was my buddy on this project, and like he was on Selfie, and like he mixed Restless Years as well. But you know, it's very much using his skills of painting on multi-track, you know, really sort of making something live out of my very simple templates. We work well together. But the funny thing is, because of the pandemic, we couldn't actually get together on this one. So everything had to be sent to John, and then John sends it back to me, and I go, no, let's try this. And so there was a lot of conversation. And I've got to say, I admire John a lot, because he sometimes took what almost was like criticism of his great work, and then embellished it. And all the time patiently just said, yeah, okay, let's try that. Yeah. Even if he didn't quite agree with me, he'd go with me, you know. So it's a great team we've got together.
Yeah. Well, they're the stories behind Northern Songs, Leo Sayers' interpretation of, or reinvention of the Beatles.
Yeah. You've got the extra track as well. There's the extra track of Eleanor Rigby at the end as well, which was another version.
Mix two of Eleanor Rigby.
Mix two, yeah, version 2, yeah. Well, it was a different construction, and it was something I did. I tried out Garage Band, and so I wrote it in an afternoon and constructed it in an afternoon, and it was so good. I just had to, oh my God, so I had to get the original Garage Band program and just redo it with all those sounds. So that was a real quick one. And before I started on, you know, release the album, I made a video that you might have seen, and it's a black and white video of me in a cap and some background footage of old Liverpool. And so I put that out actually before the project, and I thought, I'll test the water, because if they don't like this, I don't have to release it. So I can just dump it. But the reaction was really strong. So I thought at the end of the day, and John Hudson turned around to me and said, oh, you've got to include that as well. So the album is bookended with Eleanor Rigby to Eleanor Rigby.
Well, there it is, Northern Songs. Leo, thank you for going through the story of the creation of this album for us.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you for your inspiration in the fact that you've known this project for as long as it's been, almost the 14 years that it's been developed. And you've been very enthusiastic all the time with me and keep saying to me, come on, finish it, Leo. So finally, here we are.